Hey folks, so I'm going to go over adding positive and negative fractions and decimals. So far in lesson 8, we have looked at adding positive and negative integers. Those are part of the rational number family, but fractions and decimals are also part of the family. Let's dive in. On a cave dive in Oahu, a scuba diver swims at an elevation of -20 and 3/4 feet relative to sea level. The scuba diver notices a sea turtle above them and rises 6 feet to take its picture. At what elevation does the scuba diver take the picture? So we have to dissect this a little bit. We have to understand what exactly it is asking us and what information it's giving us. Usually in questions like this, there's also pictures involved. So I do see a picture. And here it says rises 6 feet and it's pointing up. So that means it's going to increase by 6 feet. But let's go back to the actual question. At first, they say that this scuba diver is at an elevation of -3/4 feet relative to the sea level. So we have to think about what that means. Because it's negative, he's below the sea level. So we can use negative numbers to talk about being below a position. Then we see that he rises 6 feet. So he's going to increase by 6. We can represent this situation by an addition expression. The addition expression that would represent this situation is -20 and 3/4 plus a +6. We have some integer rules and rational number rules that we can apply here. Really, it's the addition rules. I'm noticing that one of my numbers is a negative and one of mine is a positive. So the rules that we were doing with integers is if they are opposite signs, we're actually going to subtract. And if they're the same signs, we're going to take their absolute value, add them up, and keep the sign, whether it's both positive, so it'll stay positive, or if they're both negative, it would stay negative. So let's look. Now, -20 and 3/4 is all negative. I can take that -20 and 3/4 and write it as a -20 plus a -3/4. So now I'm starting to see integers again. And I'll bring down that +6. The integers I'm seeing are -20 and a +6. And so I'm going to apply my integer rules of addition, which says that if they are opposite signs, I'm actually going to subtract them. So 20 minus 6 is 14. So when I combine these two, I get 14. Now I have to think to myself, did I have more negatives or did I have more positives? And the answer is more negatives. So combined, this gives us a -14. I'm going to bring down my -3/4 as well. So this makes it a little bit easier. Now I have two numbers and they're both the same signs. So they're both negative. So I can use my addition rules for when I have the same signs, and that's just add them together and keep the sign. Well, 14 and 3/4 is 14 and 3/4. And because both of them were negative, our overall answer is negative. Now, there were other ways to do this. We could have used a number line. We could have converted into decimals. You know what? Let's go back up and convert everything into decimals and see how that would look. Let me just erase some of this to make some room. All right. Let's look back over here. Let's convert -20 and 3/4 into a decimal. Well, there is a whole 20, so that's a -20, and then the 3/4 create a decimal. 3/4 or 3/4 is 0.75, so it's -20.75. Then when it rises, so I'm increasing it by 6. So now I have an equivalent expression to the left and the right. But now I'm working with decimals. Now 6 is a whole number, so technically I can add a decimal after the 6, and because it says 7.5, I can also add 2 zeros, right? For placing it under the 7 and under the 5. Now we're going to use our addition rule. Different signs subtract. So I'm going to place the negative or the 20.75 on the top because the absolute value of negative 20.75 is greater than the absolute value of 6. And I'll place the 6 underneath the 20.75. Make sure when you're adding and subtracting decimals, you're lining up the decimal places. We are going to subtract. 5 take away 0 is 5. 7 take away 0 is 7. I put that decimal right down there, right? It just goes straight down. Now, 0 nothing can be taken away from 0, so we're going to have to borrow. I'm going to borrow 10 wholes. So now I have 10 minus 6, and 10 minus 6 is 4, and then 1 minus nothing is 1. So the difference of 20.75 and 6 is 14.75. Well, we've done our addition rule that actually told us to subtract, and now we have to apply the positive or negative about that rule. So because we had more negatives, our overall answer is negative. So we get negative 14.75, which is equivalent to negative 14 3/4. I could have also written this as negative 59 over 4. So we have a mixed number, a decimal, and an improper fraction. And the way I got negative 59 is, well, 14 times 4 gets me 56. So I have negative 56 plus another negative 3. So that's negative 59 over 4. So either of these would have been the correct answer. As you can see, they showed using a number line. Oh, and they used the way that I used as well, breaking up. Let's go on to page 62. And let's look at number 6. Now, in number 6, a chemist has a mixture with temperatures 3.5 degrees Celsius. Then they cool the mixture. The temperature changes by negative 14.2 degrees Celsius. What's the temperature of the mixture after it cools? Well, these are decimals. So let's first come up with an expression that we can use to figure out what the temperature of the mixture is after it cools. They first gave us the original was 3.5. Okay, then it changes by 14.2. So we're adding 14.2, but it goes down. So it's going to be a negative 14.2. So this expression here is going to help us to calculate the new temperature after it cools. So I'm looking at these two numbers and I notice one is a positive and one is a negative. So our rule of addition tells us we're actually going to subtract. I'm going to put the number that has the higher or the bigger absolute value on top. I like to do it vertically. It helps me to line things up. So 3.5 or negative 14.2. Well, the absolute value of negative 14.2 is greater than the absolute value of 3.5. So I'm going to start with 14.2. And I'm going to put 3.5 right underneath that, lining up my decimals. Different signs subtract, so you can't subtract 5 from 2, so we're going to borrow from the 4, making that a 12. So 12 take away 5 is 7. The decimal comes on down. 3 take away 3 is 0. And 1 take away nothing is 1. So we get 10.7. So our new answer is 10.7. But wait a second. I had more negatives than I had positives. So I have to still apply that it is a negative overall. So it's negative 10.7 degrees Celsius. Moving down to number 7, I'm looking at these two numbers and I'm noticing they are both negative. That means I can just add them up and then keep the negative. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. There's different methods to doing this. The first thing I'm looking at is maybe I want to separate the whole numbers from the fractions. And then the second idea that I had is maybe I can convert everything into decimals. Well, whichever way works for you is the way that works for you. Sometimes it's better not to convert into decimals because I find that when there's a repeating decimal, we accidentally round and we don't want to do that. But I know that 3/4 gets me a terminating decimal and 1/2 also gets me a terminating decimal. So I'm going to go with that. I'm going to change these into decimals. 3/4 is 0.75, so this is negative 12.75 plus, and then 1/2 is 0.5, so negative 5.5. Same signs, we're going to add them up and keep the sign. So 12.75 plus 5.5. Notice how I lined up the decimals. And you can add a 0 to the end of that as well. All right, so 5 plus 0 is 5. 7 plus 5 is 12. Carry the 1. Don't forget that decimal. 2 plus 5 is 7, plus 1 more is 8. And then 1 plus nothing is 1. So we get 18.25. We're not done though. Both of those numbers were negative. So our overall answer is negative 18.25. Some of you might have also gotten negative 18 and 1/4. And some of us may have even converted it into improper fractions. And so 18 times 4 is 72, and 72 plus 1 is 73. So negative 73/4 was our third option. So any of these three options would have been correct. Lastly, we have negative 2.75 plus 8.25. Now these are different signs, so they're actually going to subtract. Let's write them down and line up the decimals. 8.25 is actually greater than 2.75. These are the absolute values that I'm talking about. So I'm going to put that on top. 8.25 minus 2.75. And again, I line up those decimals. 5 minus 5 is 0. Can't take 7 away from 2, so we're going to have to borrow. 12 minus 7 is 5. Bring down the decimal, and 7 minus 2 is 5. Now, this is a terminating decimal, so we don't really need that 0 at the end. And when I look up here, I see we have more positives than we do negatives. So our overall